I was still bedwetting till the age of 10 years. And I did not know that it was due to sickle cell disorder. That sickle cell disorder is not only affecting the physical body, it's also affecting the mental, the mind, the mental capacity of somebody to function mentally and emotionally.
You were the first doctor that I heard talk about. This is not something they talk about publicly. This week on the Sick Sexy, I'm joined by a very special guest, all the way from Saudi Arabia, Dr. David Owoeye. Dr. David Owoeye is a medical doctor who specialises in infection prevention and control. He has over 10 years' experience in this field, and he's also a sickle cell warrior, an advocate, and author of A Life with Sickle Cell Anemia. David has spent his entire life raising awareness about sickle cell disease and what it means to live with a life-threatening and invisible illness. Dr. Owoeye, thank you so much for being here today. I'd like to kick us off with your journey so far. So if you can start by telling us why spreading the word about sickle cell anemia is so important to you.
Thank you, Sophia. It's an opportunity, and I appreciate the opportunity, more so because we both live with sickle cell disorder. So it's natural to talk about it with somebody that understands. And that brings me to answering that question, why do you spread the awareness? Sickle cell disorder is a disorder that is genetic, you live with it. And there is little information. I want to say categorically as a doctor, because I thought while I was in medical school and I started practicing as a doctor, there was much information. So based on when I clocked or close to 40 years, I started experiencing some things I never knew were part of sickle cell disorder. And I started reaching out to other sickle cell warriors and discovered that those things were the same thing. And so that's why I would say sickle cell disorder is a disorder with very little information. In the public space, even in the medical community, there is limited information. And when you don't have the right information, it will be difficult for you to be able to give the right treatment, the right care, allocate resources properly. It will be difficult. And that is why speaking about it is to ensure that, one, we eradicate those myths, misconception, and misunderstanding about it. When you know what some people are facing based on misconception or myths, let me quickly digress here. There is a lady, I think in her 30s in Nigeria, that she is a sickle cell warrior, hemoglobin SS, and her education only got to secondary school. And the reason her parents did this, though her parents are educated, is because a religious leader told their parents that spending money on the child is a waste of resources. Our siblings are gone further beyond secondary education, gone to the university, but she stopped. And so she's living with sickle cell disorder and the conditions, crisis, complications, depression. And so when you see that people are educated, our parents are educated, and that's how it cuts across many places in Africa. And now coming to Saudi Arabia, I come to understand and connecting with you and other sickle cell warriors that these misconceptions and myths still exist. So it is important that we break and eradicate those myths, misconceptions, and misinformation about sickle cell disorder. Another thing is that so that we can improve the knowledge, as we said, there is limited information, scarce information in the public space, and limited information in the medical community. I have related with doctors, and even when I hear something some doctors say, I will be like, what? I was the time I presented in the ER of the hospital after suffering with this migraine-like headache. We discussed it, that is associated with chronic fatigue syndrome, for 72 hours. And I had exhausted all the medication. I'm placed on tramadol. I used the maximum dose of paradol per day. I used more than that. Combined it with paracetamol codeine, combined it with diclofenac gel, and many other medications, like Selecosip. And nothing was able to stop it. And the headache was triggering pain crisis frequently. So I presented at the hospital after 72 hours of that headache with periods of pain crisis. And the doctor was seeing me, and I told him, okay, what are you going to do? He says, going to order for CT and then put me in their emergency room so that a consultant or specialist hematologist come and see me, and then he will place me on intravenous paracetamol. I told him I've used medication stronger than paracetamol. Paracetamol will not work. He said, well, that is the protocol. We have to start with that. And I asked him, what about intravenous fluid? And he said, you know, you don't need intravenous fluid. You know, you are a doctor. And I was surprised. I
Wow.
don't know that as a doctor, because what I know as a doctor is anytime any person with sickle cell disorder present with a sickle cell crisis, one of the first things you want to achieve is rehydration, because it will help you flush off those sickle cells that trigger the crisis. Now I'm hearing a doctor like me saying that I should know that intravenous fluid is not necessary for it. Because somebody with sickle cell disorder that is presenting with a sickle cell crisis in the ER. So that lets you know that these things are really
Wow.
limited information in the public, in the medical field. And so
Mm.
other aspect to it is encourage, now that we know there is limited information that's affecting even the approach of providing care. That is why we need to encourage more research and studies into sickle cell disorder. Perhaps when we do that, we'll be able to discover better ways of managing it. Perhaps a doctor will not see that there is no need for an intravenous food for somebody that's presenting with pain crisis in an emergency room. Perhaps we have cure for sickle cell disease. And all of this is to ensure that I inform and inspire people with my story. I inform people truthfully, because there is so many things about sickle cell disorder that if people listen to it, they will feel depressed, they will feel hopeless. But there is no way you can let people do the right thing if you don't give them the right information. So the best thing is tell them how sickle cell deal with us. One of the problems we've had over the years is that we have been communicating to people about sickle cell disorder based on the way some people want us to say it, not what we experience.
Mm.
Now we have to break
Wow.
that jinx. Let us tell people the way we experience it. If people need to know that at
Mm.
times we feel like committing suicide, let them know, because that is how it is dealing with us. And if they know this, they will be able to give us the appropriate attention we need. And so when you are informing and inspire people, what else do I want to achieve? So that other people will not suffer the things we have suffered. So that is what
So true.
inspires me and motivates me. Thank you.
That's amazing, Dr. Owoeye, and thank you for sharing the story about, I guess, some of the stigma that you face when you go into hospital, because even just listening to you, it's shocking that as a medical doctor, you face that stigma. Even with someone with sickle cell, there is still so much information that's spread in hospitals. So, thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important for people to know that just because you're a health professional doesn't mean that you don't face condescending behavior, discrimination when you go to hospital, or a lack of belief. And I think it's really important for people to know that. You touched on before about how a big part of your passion and drive is to help inform and inspire people. And just as someone who reads a lot of your work and has had the absolute honor of knowing you, I know that poetry is a way that you help to spread knowledge about sickle cell disease. Can you tell me a little bit about how you use poetry to inspire others and also to spread the word about sickle cell?
Okay, thank you for that question. I want to answer it like this because I'm a Christian. To be able to effect change, you need to be able to get your information across to policymakers, decision makers, because those are the ones that will be able to make policies, guidelines that will change things that will give appropriate care. Now, I have a gift of writing, and I understood this even as a teenager. And I understood that I'm a poet, and I started writing about poetry. Now, with sickle cell, I know based on my relationship with God, because years back, when I was still a teenager, I prayed that God should heal me, engage in a lot of things, fasting and the rest. And God said, no, I'm not going to heal you. I'm going to use sickle cell disorder to glorify my name in your life. It took me a while to understand that. And I will confess that the early parts of my life, it was just recently that I started advocating, because I was not only shocked, I was disappointed. I didn't understand how God can use sickness to glorify His name. But we know as human beings, we are not God. And God knows, the Bible tells us that God's ways is higher than our ways. God's thoughts is farther than our thoughts. The way you think is not the way God thinks. And now appreciating how speaking out has reached out to many people all over the world. I am more grateful to God, and I wish I had obeyed earlier. to start advocating. So it is a gift I have, and then I want to reach out to our audience. God says He's going to use it to glorify His name in my life. Okay, I want to use God's gift to glorify His name, and He has notified me. I want you to use your story to inform and inspire the world. So that is the gift I have. Writing poetry is one of those gifts, and so I use it. Just submit it to God. Okay, have your way, God, and it gives me inspiration. At times when you are having those crises or those conditions, you are not even in the mood to write those. But one of the things that keeps me going on is that this experience is not just about you only. It's also about the people you are going to
Mm,
reach out to. And that
mm,
inspires me to write. And at times you come out of the crisis and you are writing about what you went
yeah.
through. And you are posting it and people are responding. I remembered somebody, a doctor bought my book and gave it to the book I published and gave it to a sickle cell warrior in Nigeria, a lady. And based on her comment, she said the lady was crying. She said she was crying at each time she was reading it because the book was exposing everything about her life. Now, it is a privilege to do that. I've never met some of these people, and I don't think I will physically meet some of them. But if what I can do under God is use that gift to reach out to people, such that somebody will be able to tell his or a caregiver or parent that, I've been finding it difficult to articulate the word to tell you what I feel. But by reading this book,
Mm,
you'll be able to understand what it is. And the person's like, oh, I'm so sorry.
mhm,
Let me now give you the appropriate care. I think I've achieved something worthwhile. So it's just submitting your
mm.
gift to God. That boy submitted the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes, and God fed 5,000 men, excluding the women. So if you put the women and children, probably to be more than almost 10,000. I think I'm just doing what God wants me to do to be able to reach out to my own 5,000 people in my generation or more than.
Wow. And that's a huge number, Dr. Owoeye. Like you don't think in your head. I know in this digital world, um, your value and your merit is on how many followers you have on social media. But when you think about how much 5,000 people is, if you were to put 5,000 people in a room, and the fact that your words and your vision and your experience has been able to reach those people on a really deep and emotional level and speak to people, the fact that you made someone cry, it just speaks to the fact that your experience is having a really positive impact on the world, and you've been able to do that through your faith. So I think that's really important to remember, and I can relate to that. That in moments when you're in so much pain, when it's hard to even have a conscious, rational thought, because I said this the other day to someone that the way I describe the pain is like being repeatedly stabbed. If anyone has been through a sickle crisis, they would know that's what it feels like. In that moment, it's very hard to have a normal thought. But I often find that when I've been through the most pain is when I'm most creative, is when I want to write and be creative. Sometimes I think, like you said, God has given you this gift for a reason, and it's almost like it becomes stronger when you go through adversity. So I think that's really powerful. Um, I guess over your life and over your career, Dr. Way, how do you feel sickle cell has affected your journey so far?
Okay, based on my career as a medical doctor, it helps me to be able to research better and understand what I'm going through and be able to communicate it. And then, that gift of writing helps you to be able to put most of those medical terms in a layman's word, and they'll be able to relate with it better, that this is what it really means. There was a time I wrote about describing how the pain crisis is like. And one of the examples I gave is when a woman is in labor pain, the active labor pain. And I was able to describe it properly, how the service is fully dilated. Because I am a medical doctor, I have read about it, I've managed patients with it. So I could go to those details and explain it to people. So when someone that has given birth to a child before is hearing about that, he or she will understand that, wow. I remember there was a time I put that poem on a publication, and a woman commented that I didn't know that the kind of pain people with sickle cell disease go through like this is horrible. Why could she use the word horrible? Because that experience of when she's in full-time labor and she's about to deliver the child and the service is fully dilated, that the best way to describe it to her is horrible. And she's coming to understand that our pain crisis is best described as horrible. So if tomorrow she sees somebody in a pain crisis, she will be able to give the appropriate attention and care because she's now enlightened that it, the best way you can describe it is horrible. So I believe, I appreciate God that studying medicine has given me that edge to be able to break down those medical terms in the layman's language so that they will understand what we go through and create better awareness and advocate more for sickle cell disorder.
Thank you so much for mentioning that story, because I think when a lot of people that don't understand sickle cell hear it for the first time, they assume, oh, it's a blood disorder, so it just affects your iron levels or it makes you a bit tired. They don't realize the severity of the pain that we go through. And I guess, with crises comes with, absenteeism from work. It comes with pain. It comes with, fatigue. How has that affected your career? Has that have your crises affected having time off? Have you needed to change the way you work or the location that you work? Tell me a little bit about your experience with sickle cell.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. Definitely it has. I can One of the things I've discovered now is I can't stay in a cold environment for long. I can't stay in the room with the AC on for long. Everybody in Saudi Arabia, it's desert, and then it's more hot and sunny here than other parts of the world. So at times temperatures could go very high, and it's more comfortable and convenient for people to come into the building and put on the AC. But that is what is comfortable for others, but it's not comfortable for me. I will also come into the building and enjoy the AC, but within the next 5 minutes and 10 minutes, the AC is no longer comfortable for me. And so I have to relocate to other rooms where nobody is and put off the AC so that I will be able to do my work. So that has affected me. And I did notify my colleagues. They know about my status as sickle cell disorder, and I get to explain to them, and they get to understand it better. The good thing about it is that before some of these things I've been experiencing, I've been working my office for almost 8 years. For the past almost before, like almost the early 3 4 years, I wasn't having most of these frequent crises, chronic pain syndrome that is described as having pain crisis at least 3 days in a week. And at times it's like every day in the week you're having it. Before then, I wasn't like that. And they have noted, thank God, they've noted that I'm very diligent with my work. I'm hardworking. I do my work properly. So when I now present to them with pain, they know this is not the kind of person he is. He has always been diligent with his work. And so when he is coming with pain, he's genuinely telling us he's
I've
having pain.
lost you.
And they are getting to understand sickle cell disorder better. Because
Are you still with
the
me,
center
David?
I'm in Saudi Arabia is called Jizan. Jizan is the epicenter of sickle cell disorder in Saudi Arabia. So one way or the other, everybody has someone in their family or amongst their relatives or their community that has sickle cell disorder. And when they see the way I narrate it or the way I behave, they now understand and can connect better with why their cousin or their nephew behave the way they behave regarding sickle cell. And I believe it will be able to help them to offer care in a better way. Because when you don't understand it, you won't know how to respond. But when you understand it better, you'll be able to respond to other people that have it in a better way. And so, even at times when I have the chronic fatigue, and there was a day I had that chronic fatigue, which I shared in the book we co-authored together, and it started early in the morning, and I notified them I will not be able to come to work, and they understood. So when I got to explain to them the chronic fatigue, they were like, "Wow, they've never had that kind of chronic fatigue before," and that even amongst others. So when they get to see other people sickle cell disorder describing it, they will better appreciate what they are going through. That okay, I've met somebody that said this is what they experienced, and what you are telling me is the same thing, and they'll be able to respond to them properly. So thank God that the people I work with, some of them get to understand, my boss understand, and they allow me to take time off when I need to take time off. They allow me to change room when I need to change room so that I can be in an environment that is not cold, contrary to what they prefer. And so that has helped me. When you have workers that are understanding, you may not be able to have all of them understanding, but some of them will be understanding. And their understanding will help you to be able to manage the crisis, manage sickle cell disorder properly in your work environment. So thank God that has helped me so far.
Do you feel, have you ever worked somewhere where people have been less understanding and you felt discriminated for sickle cell, Dr. Owoeye?
Um, Let me see. Well, I felt, even if I feel discriminated, you see, the later, early part of my life, before 40 years, it was, how will I describe it? It was heroic. I want to use an appropriate word. It was like a star. Through medical school, very diligent with my studies. I engage in business, won 2 business award. Engage in my school departmental fellowship and won 2 awards within that period. I was winning awards and people. So even when I get to tell some of my colleagues now that I have sickle cell disorder, they find it difficult to believe because the David they knew well in medical school did not look like somebody that have sickle cell disorder. So
Yes.
it was difficult to go through that kind of discrimination for me. So it is
Mm,
currently that maybe, but unfortunately, the kind of experience God has helped me to live with. If you want to discriminate, I will lecture you better. And at the end of the day, you will feel disappointed that you are discriminated because I'll let you know that even what you are doing, by the grace of God, I can do better than that. Yet with sickle cell disorder. And so you should you should be more caring, you should be more open and stop that. And they
mm,
will just keep quiet. So I have not been in that position where I feel discriminated because the early part of my life was so dramatic with not with crisis but with achievements, with awards.
mm,
And so
mm.
some people don't find find it very difficult to believe now that you have sickle cell disorder all the while you are experiencing some of those things, and yet you are still making impact. So that's how the story has been like.
That's amazing. And I think I relate to a lot of what you're saying because I find the hardest part of sickle cell is the not people not understanding that you can look perfectly fine on the surface and you can be going through so much. And what I really love about your approach is that you're saying if you're just more open and honest and you share with your colleagues and you share with the people around you, then you allow them to understand more so that there's no room for discrimination because people understand, even if they can't understand what the pain feels like, they get it because you've sat down and explained to them, this is what I go through and this is what I'm experiencing. So I think that's something that's really powerful because there are people in our community who have sickle cell who feel ashamed, who feel like they can't tell people about their illness. And I think shame is something that affects a lot of people. So it's really important that you're saying, be honest, be open, talk to people. Don't be afraid to write books. Don't be afraid to tell people that what you need. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Dr. Away, is there anything about invisible illness or sickle cell in general that you would really like people to know?
Okay. One of the things I want people to know is chronic fatigue syndrome, and CDC described it the first time. Initially, when I started experiencing it, I checked a lot of publications, and there was limited information. And until recently, I got to know the CDC described it. And even though they excluded, they didn't mention sickle cell disorder. I want the public to know that sickle cell disorder also causes chronic fatigue syndrome. So we experience it. Recently, WHO has been talking about post-COVID. I had COVID infection September, and I have spoken to some people that have COVID, and I've listened to their post-COVID experience. It is the same symptom and the same pattern of presentation with chronic fatigue syndrome. That uh, unrefreshing sleep you have, or the chronic fatigue that does not get relief after sleeping, and you wake up and you feel weaker. Recently, I was sharing an experience of the short-term loss of memory. That at times you have to use many words to say a single thing because that is how it is like. And I
Mm,
remember somebody that had chronic COVID infection, not sickle cell disorder, but chronic infection, COVID infection,
mhm,
responded that she can relate well with this because that is the same thing she experiences with COVID. Now, it is good that people are getting to understand, but I hope not only people, but the health community, WHO, and every other health organizations to understand that if you want to know about chronic fatigue syndrome, please listen to people with sickle cell disorder. Many of us have been going through it for a while, and people have not been talking. And the fact that people have not been talking doesn't mean they've not been suffering from it. Many people have been suffering from it. And I understand why it's difficult for people to talk about it because it took me so much. The first time I told one of the doctor, about the chronic fatigue. He just like, yeah, sickle cell disorder can cause chronic fatigue because your red blood cells is broken down frequently, and then because of the short lifespan of red blood cell. And I was disappointed because I know that was not what I was feeling. And so he prescribed multivitamin for me, and he did not do anything. Until later on, I met that doctor during that 72 hours migraine-like headache that I had. And he said, yes, I've heard about chronic fatigue syndrome before, but I've never heard that it occurs with people living with sickle cell disorder. I'm the first person with sickle cell disorder that will be talking about it, having it. And so I thank God that that experience helped him to be able to understand now that people with sickle cell disorder also experience it. In fact, one of the hematologists said to believe properly after doing a lot of tests, she said I should go and do serum vitamin B12 level to go and check it. So I did it. They took my blood twice and it was normal. And I sent it to her. And she saw it and she said, so it is indeed chronic fatigue syndrome. Because I did a lot of tests for them to understand. And initially I was reluctant because it was painful to go through some of those tests. But at the back of my mind, I knew I was not doing it for myself alone. I'm doing so that a lot of sickle cell warriors and other people that suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome will understand it better. I was relating with a doctor that had chronic COVID infection, and we were discussing. And she said something that, some people that have been seen in the past, patients that we tagged as having a medical condition called somatization. Well, somatization is you have you are having complaints, symptoms, but when they run tests, none of those tests shows point to those symptoms, and so they put it. We medical science put it as maybe it's a mind problem. Your body is having all of these symptoms, sweating, pain, and all of those stuff. At times, panicking, shortness of breath, and you do a lot of tests, thyroid hormone tests, and none of them points to it. So they tag it as somatization. And she said, during an internship here, they got to realize that some of those people we categorize as somatization was actually chronic fatigue syndrome, and it's because limited information. So speaking about it now has helped us to understand that there is something called chronic fatigue syndrome, and that it is not only people with sickle cell disorder, people with COVID-19, HIV, TB, tuberculosis, cancer experience it too. Unfortunately, many people have not been speaking, and they suffer. It is not an experience; it is suffering, and it is time the medical community and the world do something about it. I listened to somebody's YouTube presentation on chronic fatigue syndrome, and I like the way the person described it. He said, after a while, it just takes you away from the public life. And people like, where is this person? It's no more there. Because what you are going through, you can't deal with it. And there is no medical textbook or publication that is telling you this is how to manage it. So you are learning to manage it yourself. And how do you get to live with that? So I want this medical community and the world to understand chronic fatigue syndrome and what it is like, and the migraine-like headache, the short memory loss, and many other conditions they present. I want them to also understand about chronic pain syndrome, whereby you're having pain crisis in at least 3 days in a week, and I will suffer through a lot of this. I want them to also understand the medical community that sickle cell disorder is not only affecting the physical body, it's also affecting the mental, the mind, the mental capacity of somebody to function mentally and emotionally right from birth, because I suffered nocturnal enuresis, bedwetting, and I knew the way it affected me. I was still bedwetting till the age of 10 years, and I did not know that it was due to sickle cell disorder until later on when later on, that was when I got to understand that sickle cell disorder also causes bedwetting. And so there are many. I remember I spoke about it public, and a woman approached me that even as child with sickle cell disorder, she needs to consult with her husband whenever other children want to travel, and then she needs to join them. They are afraid because they don't want the child to be bedwetting wherever they go. And I understand that fear as a parent. So it is something and the medical community need to understand that people with sickle cell disorder are going through it, and there's nothing they do that the community prescribe that stops it. And so, what can we do? How can the medical community help the child to be able to navigate that experience? Or Peter, when you are eating sand, sickle cell disorder also causes it. I had sand till I was 18 years old, till God finally delivered me. And when I shared my experience, I had many sickle cell warriors talking about eating foam, some talking about eating charcoal, and some talking about, wow, so this is actually due to sickle cell disorder. And so all over the world.
You were the first doctor that I heard talk about. This is not something they talk about publicly. And, this is not something I've ever shared publicly before. But as a child, I used to eat paper. I used to love toilet paper, tissue paper, and I never understood why. My family never understood why. And it wasn't until you spoke about it that I realized that maybe it was a symptom of sickle cell all along, and I grew out of it. But it's such an unusual symptom to have that it's not spoken about publicly. So thank you for bringing that to light.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So that is one of the things I would want the medical community to look into. How do we navigate life as a child born with sickle cell disorder throughout your lifetime? Because sickle cell disorder affects you throughout your lifetime. As it's affecting you physically, it's affecting you mentally. Priapism. We had a presentation last week about priapism, and I'm making them understand that somebody that's having that painful, purposeless penile erection, you will have suffered at home for a long time because it's not something you will feel confident to present in the hospital. You present in the ER, they ask you, what is the problem? I'm having painful penile erection. And everybody's looking at you. But it's something you're suffering. The same way you have that pain crisis and the kind of way it messes your mind and kind of way it tortures you, that is the same way priapism will torture us. And so medical community notes give us a better way to approach this and to manage this properly so that many people will not keep suffering from these things because many people are suffering from it. So those are some of the things I want to highlight that they know about chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic pain syndrome, PICA, which other one? That short-term memory loss, I forgot it. But the other
Priapism
one, priapism, yeah, that I talked about, and bedwetting, nocturnal emesis.
and bedwetting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the chronic fatigue is a really important one as well because even like here in Australia, chronic fatigue is not mentioned as a symptom of sickle cell. And when we mentioned before when you went to the doctor, you had a blood test and they said, well, it's just your low hemoglobin, and they kind of like excused it as it's just a normal part of sickle cell. But really, it's another medical condition that you're having to manage on a daily basis. And it's really quite remarkable when you think about you have such a busy lifestyle, you work full time, you're a doctor, and it's like you're managing two medical conditions at the same time. But it's almost like the importance of it is not highlighted in medical literature and it's not talked about. Like the chronic fatigue is something I can relate to, but again, is something I'm afraid to talk about because I'm scared it won't be believed or it will be brushed under the carpet. It's just another symptom of sickle cell. So thank you for highlighting that. You're such a wealth of
Sorry. Quickly, let me just quickly chip in this so that I
yeah.
could enlighten people. As you said, people could just brush it under the carpet because they don't believe it. For the past 4 weeks, I've been having it consistently, and every week I've been doing my checking my blood, complete blood count with my hemoglobin, and it has been increasing. So how do you relate with it? From there was a time I engaged in a week fast and it dropped to 9. And then it picked up 10, 11. The last time I checked it was 11.1. And I was having chronic fatigue consistently. So for those who think it is because of low blood, my hemoglobin was not low. It kept increasing and yet I was having it. You are climbing the stairs and you are gasping for breath. That's one of the experience I'm having about it, which medicine describes as easy fatigability. And that is part of the experience somebody that has heart failure present with. I know this as a doctor, but when I did echo, my heart is okay, no problem. And so when you are telling them this, they don't understand it because you do the test and it shows that, oh, this is a symptom that you associate with heart failure. And you are doing echoes, ECG, and it shows that your heart is normal. They need to listen that the fact that they are denying it or they are not accepting it does not prevent you from experiencing it or does not stop you from suffering from it. So if you suffer for it for 4 hours, 6 hours in a day, you will keep on suffering. Can they just show some empathy and listen and know that we are suffering? And the fact that they are not listening does not stop. Sickle cell is not going to say, okay, they are not listening to you, so let me stop. No, we keep suffering from it.
It's so true. It's so true. It's a really great analogy, and I couldn't agree more. Oh, you're such a wealth of information, David, and I just want to thank you again for sharing your story and being vulnerable because I think a lot of people will benefit from this conversation. One last question I'd like for us to wrap up on is, can you share something with us that you have never shared before? And this can be about sickle cell, or it can be about your medical profession, or it can just be about you.
Okay, something I shared before about sickle cell disorder. Uh, Early those years when I was growing up, because, okay, as I said, God said he was not going to heal me, but he's going to use sickle cell disease to glorify his name in my life. I was living recklessly. I was not using medications. The only time I did use folic acid were those periods when I have pain crisis. Immediately after the pain crisis, maybe in the next few days, I would just stop. And the reason is because I was not happy that God said he was not going to heal me. So I was just like, let sickle cell disorder kill me. I'm not interested in this life. But another thing God told me then is, sickle cell anemia cannot kill you. So even if I had wanted to die, God has already said cannot kill me. And when I was just living recklessly about it, it was recently, like almost 4 years back, that God told me, I cannot use you to be talking to other sickle cell warriors to use their medication. I cannot use you to be talking to other sickle cell warriors to be compliant with their clinics when you don't use your medications, when you are not compliant with your clinic. If I do use you to do that, you will be an hypocrite. And I do not work with hypocrites. So since then, I started using my medication. Everything my doctor prescribed, I use it religiously. I use it daily. I'm on folic acid. I'm on calcium. I'm on vitamin D. I'm on hydroxyurea. I grew up with never using hydroxyurea, even though I could easily have access to it. It was 5 years ago that I started using hydroxyurea because God rebuked me. And that's when I started. So the aspect of God telling me that sickle cell anemia cannot kill me is one thing I've never shared with anybody before.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story. It's really vulnerable and just is a testament to how strong your faith is and your connection to God and how that has led you through your life and to the decisions you've made. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Dr. Owoeye, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear about your story, both personally and professionally. And I know that through your words and your poetry and, just your voice, you will change people's lives. And, I really hope the 5,000 and 10,000 becomes 20,000 and 50,000 because people really deserve to hear your voice. So thank you so much for being a part of today.
Thank you very much, Sophia. God bless you. And God increase you to continue doing what you are doing so that a lot of people will be inspired that you can be beautiful, you can be a model, even though you have sickle cell disorder. They will understand that they can choose not to let sickle cell limit them or make something meaningful with their life.